Welcome in to the M&M Discipleship podcast, where we discuss what it means to be a disciple of Christ. Our aim, of course, is to look for God in our daily lives, be in His Word, and strive to live out the teachings of Jesus. This is Dakota Moody, and this is also my co-host, Michael Round. So glad to have you all here today for this, our first episode in this series. Was the first episode that's usually the pilot. It's also called the flagship. No, that'd be like the main one in a network, wouldn't it be? So
Yeah, I guess so.
Is there another name for a first podcast?
Maybe a launch episode.
Our launch episode. I like
Yeah,
launch. That sounds good.
yeah.
I also like it because it sounds close to lunch, and I like that too.
Yes, exactly. So we don't know when you'll be listening to this, but if it's near lunch, you're welcome.
There you go. So thank you for joining us for our launch episode. Now, this is actually a podcast. Some of the stuff we put out before, it's more kind of video content that some people have called podcasts, but this is an actual legitimate podcast. So we're looking forward to starting this in our kind of new venture. There is a video portion of this if you're listening to this on audio only, though I don't know why you'd necessarily want to jump to the video unless you just want to see our ugly mugs.
Yeah.
That's up to you. But that is going to be available on our social channels, especially Facebook specifically. But we want to offer the audio content first. So let's talk about this since this is our first episode. A little bit of the intro was a prelude to what we are going to be doing here. But there's three main segments that we're going to be having here on the pod going forward. And Michael, why don't you go ahead and describe those three segments that we're going to have?
Yeah. Being a discipleship podcast, I mean, there's some things that I think we should be involved in, and one of those is looking for God and seeing what He's doing. God is not distant; He's not too far from us, and so we're going to be looking and answering the question: where have you seen God recently? And that may be something physical, and it's something you experience out in nature, or it may be God working in the lives of other people. So that'll, I think, be a good segment. And then also we're going to dive into a Bible study, brief passage of scripture and looking at that, discussing that. And then what are you reading? And that could go in any number of directions, which it's going to go in a couple of different directions today. So pretty big difference between what he and I are reading this week.
That is correct, and so there's a little bit there's quite a bit to look forward to as we get into this episode. But let's just jump right in and talk about what you first introduced, which is where have you seen God recently? Now this is all about kind of how we see God in our lives, and there's very traditional ways in which we look for God. We look in His Word, we go to Him in prayer, we look for Him in worship when we were come together in our kind of a corporate worship. But as we know, God is the God of all things, the creator of all things, and He is in all things here in this earth. And so we can see Him in nature. We can see Him in interactions with other people. We can see Him in a lot of different ways. And I want us to talk about that today. And that's what we're going to begin with is where have we seen God recently? So Michael, where have you seen God recently?
So since I'm new to Tennessee, it just seems like just timing has worked out well, but there have been a lot of people who have shown an interest in becoming a Christian, and we've had a number of baptisms, and it seems like, I mean, I know there are people working in their lives and things like that, but it just seems like God is softening the hearts of people, and it's amazing when you see someone who's willing to put Christ on in baptism and desiring to come to a relationship with God. And it's hard not to deny that God is working in their lives. And so that's been a big thing. We're supposed to have one tonight, actually. And it's just God moving and God working in the hearts and minds of people.
It's always amazing to see how God is working in people's hearts and minds in that way. If we talk, Paul talked about planting a seed but God providing the growth. And I think in that same way, we don't necessarily always realize where all God is working and what God is doing that has nothing to do necessarily with us on the outside. We've done a little piece, but God is doing 99% of the work, and it's amazing
Mm,
to see where he's doing that 99% in that way. For me,
absolutely.
where I've seen God recently, there's a lot of things I could say. As a lot of you will know, I just moved back to the Carolinas, where I'm from, originally born and raised. It's where me and Michael met each other. Was in Western North Carolina. Um, I just moved back though from to the Carolinas from Texas. And while all my Texans who may be listening to this, I did enjoy uh, a lot about my time in Texas. Um, Whenever I think about, quote unquote God's country, I think about Western North Carolina. I think about think about that, and I think about upstate South Carolina. I think these are beautiful places. Not to say that there's not a lot of beautiful things in Texas. I mean, you could argue maybe I just lived in the wrong portion of it or something like that. But I really just enjoy being back, of course, in this area and seeing the nature and the trees and the mountains that God created. And I could say, where have I seen God recently? I could say it in all that. Because I certainly do feel closer to God in this area where there is less people, which is always positive, but B, also more nature and more beautiful nature. But really, the place where I've seen God the most recently has been in the fact that we even came back to the Carolinas in the first place. We were at a time where we knew it was we needed to be back closer to family. As we think about the long term, as we think about future potential family planning, which we won't go too much into, but things like that, and trying to figure out what being closer to family, being closer to both my parents who have different health issues in different ways, being back closer to them to help in that way, and then in that, the there being a way for us to get back to a church in this area, because as many of you know, if you're a member of the Church of Christ, as me and Michael both are, maybe there's a limited amount of churches of Christ in this area for me to be able to get back to be a minister of, for there to be an opening at the just right time, and for all the timing to line up in that way. Just when we're looking to get back, I think there's no question that I've seen God and His hand working in this recently.
Mm. And that's a special thing when you can see God open doors, and one of the things that we often pray for is that God would make the way clear.
Mhm.
And in your situation, it certainly has been made clear. Well, those are some good things, good situations where we've seen God, and I certainly echo what you say about Western North Carolina and how beautiful it is, the mountains there.
For our video viewers, you can see actually the portrait that Michael has behind him of the overlook at Cataloochee in the Great Smoky
Yes,
Mountains National Park, all about West North Carolina there.
one of my favorite views, and probably one of your favorite views as well.
Mine as well, probably my absolute favorite. So
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And so definitely a special place, and we see God and what He has made for sure. So if you would, whether you're listening or you have an opportunity to open your Bible, we're going to be in Matthew 4. We're going to introduce the Sermon on the Mount today, looking at kind of the context around what's going on. So we're going to read in verse 23. Would you read, Dakota, Matthew 4, 23 to 25?
Yeah, absolutely. And as just a key rule for us when we're reading scripture, it's always good to look at the scripture immediately before and immediately after. And so that's what we're trying to do with this, because as we read the Sermon on the Mount, you may just jump right in at Matthew 5:1, and you do get this good setting that you see in verse 1 of chapter 5, but really it's important to go right before it to see what has led up to this moment. And so that's
Definitely.
what we're going to be reading, Matthew chapter 4, verses 23 through 25. And it reads in the ESV. And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick, those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, those having seizures and paralytics lowered to him. And he healed them. And great crowds followed him from Galilee and the Decapolis, and from Jerusalem and Judea, and from beyond the Jordan.
This is the point in Jesus' ministry where it's on the way up, if you will. He's doing good things and he's healing people, and his fame is spreading. So people are beginning to like him. And I would even argue that this is consistent throughout his ministry, like the common people, the average Joe. I think consistent in his ministry, they appreciate and follow Jesus. And with this, so his fame is spreading, which is going to set the table for him teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. It allows him, and so I think that's a good lesson for us in there. Is doing good to others, helping people, helping meet people's physical needs, allows us to share the gospel with them. It's a way in, a foot, a step in, an opportunity to open
A
the
foot in the
door.
door, if you will.
Foot in the door. Yeah, I was
There
I
you
was
go.
thinking that was what it was supposed to be, but
Yeah.
I always
I was
get
gonna
pretty
let you get there. I
informed.
was gonna let you get there on your own. I was gonna let you
Yeah,
try to, it was kind of, you had the puppy on the tile floor where you're kind of your paws are going,
yes,
but you're in the
yes.
same place. I understand that feeling. Yeah, yeah. But no, absolutely. I would agree in that way. We talk about Jesus, talk about his ministry. We talk about the things that he said a lot of times, and we talk about these miracles and what maybe they represent, the things that he did with his healing. There's a theory that has been posed, and I would agree with it, that Jesus in these great healings is not only showing his authority, because that's part
Mm,
of these healings is showing his authority, showing his divine authority, but it's
absolutely.
also restoring a fallen creation is also what he's doing in this way. Obviously, we know that Christ's ultimate goal is to restore mankind to eternal relationship with God,
Mm,
and to take that. But and also in healing, if we think about sickness and pain and all of these illnesses or diseases that we see Jesus heal, these are all results ultimately of sin, right?
mm,
Sin entering the world and the fall. And we see Jesus correcting that. He's restoring a fallen creation. And so in providing for their needs, not only is he showing his divine authority, but he's also restoring this fallen world. And now, who is supposed to be the hands and the feet of Jesus?
mm.
It's supposed to be us. It's supposed to be
Yeah,
us in the
absolutely.
church, right? And
Right.
so we then now have the responsibility to continue to try to help with people's physical needs as we can. Obviously, we won't be able to heal them in the way that he did, no matter how many faith healings you may have
Yeah.
witnessed, quote unquote. Maybe we can't heal them in the way that he did, but can we provide for their physical needs and continue the work of Christ in restoring a fallen creation, bringing a little heaven to earth by trying to do what Christ did here. And I think that's important for us and as an application to our modern day.
Definitely trying to be a blessing to people around us. And so we've got people following Jesus from Galilee, the Decapolis, 10 cities around the area, from Jerusalem, Judea, and from beyond the Jordan. So you've got everybody from the surrounding regions flocking to Jesus. And that's where we're going to be in Matthew 5:1. He's going to see the crowds and go up on the mountain, sit down, and those disciples came to him. And so that's kind of where we set the stage for the Sermon on the Mount. We hope you join us next time for that. So good stuff. Looking to meet people's physical needs and using that as an opportunity, first of all, to bless them, sure, but also to share the gospel with them.
What are some examples for you, by the way, real quick before we transition, of providing for people's physical needs in the modern world? Because we say provide for the physical needs. What are some concrete examples of that for you? I have
Yeah,
some
yeah.
things in my
So
mind, but go ahead.
yeah. One thing that we actually did here at Westwood, amazing thing. There's a local trust that gives money to causes that benefit kids in the community, and we put in a grant application for that and received a hefty amount of money. And
Mm,
we purchased school supplies and opened up our gym and gave out school supplies to some 600 or 700 people in our community, and people that needed school supplies. And we all know how expensive they can get for their kids. And so it was an opportunity for them for us to interact with them and be a blessing to them. And hopefully, plant some seeds that people are when they're looking, they're ready to look at a place where we are.
Absolutely. I think that's a great one because there are so many, everybody's got to go to school nowadays,
Mhm.
and that's a great thing that we have the opportunity for education for all in our modern day, but not everybody has the same amount of ability to be able to buy supplies in that way to get educated, and That's why you see sometimes low income families be in have worse test scores or worse testing, not because they are lesser, but because they don't have the same access to things. And so that's certainly a blessing that we can be a part of. And I think that's a great ministry that you guys have going on there. And I can share something from a personal experience of my own, because I was conflicted, especially in the Houston area where I was. There were so many homeless people on the streets. I know people will say it's only in Austin that those people exist in Texas, but no, it was in all the big cities. And even the not big cities, you will see homeless people everywhere, because there are people who have had issues in life, and so they end up being homeless in this way. And I was always conflicted because I want to help them, but
Mm.
you don't want to give people who are in that situation money, cash, because a lot of times the reason why they are homeless is because they develop some kind of addiction or something like that. And so you don't necessarily do that. So I'm always conflicted about what do I do? So one of the things that I started to do was I went to Costco and I bought a big pack of trail mix, and I bought some socks, because that's also very important, and some wet wipes, some moist sanitary wipes, um, and some cases of water. And I got gallon-sized Ziploc bags, and I put a couple pairs of socks, because homeless people are very much in need of socks, especially
Mm.
as it gets a little bit colder around the time of the year. Some water, some of that trail mix, and a pack of those sanitary wipes into a bag. And whenever people were in need, on the street or wherever it was, I could give them that bag, and I know that they have food, water, a little bit of clothing, and a way to take care of themselves physically.
Mm.
And
Yeah.
I found that to be a good solution. And those things don't really go bad. And so you can just keep them in your vehicle at all times, just but maybe like in the floorboard of the back seat or something like that. So at a moment's notice, if you see somebody, you can just pull it out and give it to them. So that's another way to provide for people's physical needs in our modern day.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really good idea. I've heard similar to that, and people calling them blessing bags.
Yes.
Opportunity to be a blessing for sure.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
transitioning to what we're reading, I'll go ahead and start since mine has a spiritual leaning for sure. Um, I've been reading a book by David Young called A Grand Illusion. It is about theological progressivism. And when I say progressivism or liberalism, I'm meaning to the extent that there are individuals denying the resurrection of Jesus, the physical resurrection of Jesus. They're denying the judgment. They're denying at times, the wrath of God and things like that. I mean, this is grand scheme of Christianity liberalism. I know within our fellowship, there's different meanings for that, but he's talking a lot about how it's so unbiblical, it's so against the Bible, and really it's just a gateway to atheism. That people that fall into these kinds of beliefs that water down the truth about Jesus, they end up really just they're on their way toward unbelief. I wanted to get a quote that describes liberal progressivism, and he said on page 25, North American liberal progressivism sprang from a 19th century movement developed by aristocratic white pastors, poets, and I can't even say this word, academicians for the purpose of creating a civic religion that promoted Victorian virtues for the newly formed Republic of the United States. And so this is meant to be a very sensible religion, or a very sensible way of looking at Christianity. It's very low cost. There's no cost, really. There's no need for repentance. All the teachings of Jesus are watered down. There's also a desire to emphasize the red letters, what Jesus said, over everything else, and basically striking out Romans through Revelation. I mean, there's just so anything that Paul, Peter, those guys said, get rid of those. And obviously that's false teaching. But one thing that I found interesting about that is, people that are saying that, God would not judge anyone or God is going to save everyone. It really comes from a place of privilege, because if you are in other parts of the world, or you grew up in other times, you could more clearly see the concept of injustice, the fact that injustice is in the world. You know, it's hard to talk to a Jew in Nazi Germany about the goodness of people and how all people are truly good when they are on the receiving end of the evil and wickedness of the Nazi regime. You go to other parts of our world today, women that are stuck in sex trafficking and things like that. You go to groups where there are oppressive governments. You have to lead a life of privilege to believe that there is not evil in this world that needs to be judged. And so that's one of the things that has really stood out to me is in our society, we are so comfortable and to a certain degree, so privileged that we have not seen firsthand gross injustice. Now, if you go back also even in our country to the 1960s and the civil rights, you talk to an individual in that day and time, a Black individual, about injustice, they know that firsthand. They see evil, the wickedness that was perpetrated. So in our society, he even David Young points to white people and how we lead such a privileged life that we have not seen injustice in the way that others have, and so we might have a hard time with justice, but man, there is evil in this world that needs to be judged, and a just God is going to do it.
Mm. And that's always it always the question is always, well, how could God judge somebody for X, Y, or Z
Mm.
when we know that he is the author of all the laws of nature and creation, and that he is the judge of all, and he knows all. And so some of those things that we don't even know happen, or what the roots of certain things are, he sees that, he knows that, and the only way for him to be just is to judge in these ways. And we see that, and it's sad that we have so many who they want to know God, they want to know at least of a God, and follow along with some of the beliefs that maybe they've grown up with in Christendom. However, they want to kind of reject Jesus and his teaching and some of the hard things about that. And I find that funny that you mentioned, okay, well, they want to accept the red letters, but only the red letters that they really kind of like.
Yeah,
Yeah. And once again, if you strike out the resurrection of Jesus, well, that kind of mess up the whole thing. Because if you don't have the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus, especially the resurrection, by the way, then you lose
yeah,
it all. As Paul talked about, belief to the Thessalonian church, he says, "Hey, if you don't have the resurrection, we don't believe in the resurrection of the dead. None of this matters, because that means that Jesus wasn't Jesus. That means he was just some dude that
yeah, yeah,
died.
yeah.
Because if without the resurrection, that proved his divine nature, that he
Absolutely.
was able to raise from the dead, be raised from the dead, and
One too, like,
now live
you
again."
know, yeah, yeah, yeah. And we get lulled into the fact, or we like to think more highly of ourselves, and that we're good and honest, and yeah. I mean, the Bible is very, very clear that no one is righteous, no one, not one. Like, sure, people may do good things that aren't Christians, but
Mhm.
that goodness is from God, their creator. And no person is perfect. No person is even close. And so to be deluded to thinking that, people are generally good, um, I think that goodness is from God. It's not from humanity. I mean, after all,
Mhm.
God created humanity.
That's right. Yeah, the goodness that we have, all good gifts are from
Mm,
above, from the Father of
yeah.
lights, as it were. So, absolutely.
So
So
basically, the
as
whole point of the book, and one last thing on that, the whole point of the book is to get back to the Bible,
Mhm.
because the Bible teaches us about what justice is, what righteousness is, what love is, and how we should treat one another. And we shouldn't deny the existence of evil in our world, and we should be thankful that God is going to judge the world in righteousness. And we can be also thankful, more than that Jesus came and took on our sins and died and was raised so that we can be found righteous in God's sight, all because of what he did. And like you said, if you take out the resurrection, you take out the teeth of the gospel. Like, it's gone. Paul says we should be pitied
Right.
if the resurrection didn't happen. So Yeah, a really, really insightful book, something that's opened my eyes to certainly false teaching, heretical teaching in the world today. People that are claiming the name of Christ yet denying his power.
Mm. There you go. Well, there's many books that I could talk about that I'm reading right now as we talk about what we're reading. Some that would maybe even fit in with what you're talking about towards the other side of that spectrum. But I'll save those for another time, and instead we'll get a little lighthearted here. Currently, I'm reading quite a few books, but one that I'm doing for my own kind of entertainment is I'm reading back through the Harry Potter series. Now, you guys have to understand that whenever I was younger, I could not. I've always been somebody who has to go against the grain in a way which I can't. Like if everybody's jumping on something, I have to immediately go like, well, I can't like that then because everybody else likes that. So that's why whenever growing up, I never liked any of the local sports teams because I'm like, I can't stand just being one of the crowd around me. I have to be kind of different. And so that's always been something that I've done. And so whenever Harry Potter was a big thing growing up, it was like, no, I can't enjoy this. I can't get into this. I'm not going to do this. Also, by the way, not much of a reader whenever I was young. That changed obviously now because I don't really think you can be an effective minister without reading at this
Mm.
point. But and so in my and later in life, I've gotten into reading books and I read through the Harry Potter series a few years ago and got really into it. Just love the concept of it. But of course, since this is a Christian oriented podcast, I think something that can be interesting about this is, of course, the fact that growing up, if you grew up in the generation that I did, you know that there was a lot of people who were very against the Harry Potter books because they had, quote unquote, witchcraft represented in them and things like that, magic and stuff. Of course, the funny thing I always found with that is the fact that, now that I know Harry Potter and some other books, especially like the Chronicles of Narnia, which also had magic in it, quote unquote magic. You could say that's not black magic or it's not witchcraft or something that's described in that. It's supposed to be an allegory to the divinity, I think. I'm not sure. In C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. And of course, I'm never going to defame the name of C.S. Lewis because he is just about my favorite author in history. I'm just, there's some things that we sometimes need to do as Christians where before we jump on an idea immediately because somebody said, "Hey, this is a bad thing," maybe we should look into it a little bit more. And I mean that in a lot of different ways. There was some people who had some issues with Pokemon growing up because they were pocket monsters, and there was some people that said that they had some satanic undertones, which I thought was a bit ridiculous at the time, and I still believe that today. Some people believe the same thing with the Harry Potter books and other such things. Um, I think we need to be careful, especially when we're judging things from saying that we should or shouldn't do it as Christians. I think we should always take every bit of cultural um, entertainment that we listen to and understand that it may not fit into our Christian ideals, but I think we need to be careful when we make blanket statements about things, because frankly, I, as well as many other people who have enjoyed Harry Potter, are still very faithful Christians. We're not trying to join occult practices or things like that, and I don't think the Latin words that are used are going to summon any demons anytime soon. Um, but I thoroughly enjoy those books because you see different things, courage and just an interesting world creation and that J.K. Rowling is able to make there, and just storytelling and the kind of magical world that she creates. I think it's always just been interesting, and it's one of those where if you read through the young adult series of books and you say I had to transport myself into a world, you really don't want to transport yourself into, like, I don't know, the Hunger Games. um
Yeah.
like, it's interesting to read about, but you don't want to put yourself in that story. No thank you, right? But Harry Potter is just different. It's always a fun
But
kind of world and stuff. So go ahead.
even within that, there's the fight for good and evil.
Hmm.
There's individuals that are striving to do good.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is difficult to know on a lot of those things. But yeah, I agree with you. we can get too bent out of shape out of some things. Yeah, they're not, at least I don't see anywhere that they're trying to summon a devil or anything like that. Um, it's certainly a different animal. So the question is, which book are you on?
Currently, I'm on Goblet of Fire,
Okay.
which is one
So
of
the
my
real wait,
favorites.
did
So
you pick
go ahead.
up there or you've
No,
read through? Okay,
no.
okay,
I started
okay.
all the way back to the
I
beginning
was
again. This is
good.
by the way, this is like my fourth read through again. So it's not like, I mean, this is what I do. If I find there to be a lull in what I'm because I do feel like C.S. Lewis, by the way, talked about the need to read fiction, the need to
Mm,
be in fictional situations because listen, it's very good, and I think I can tell you right now, I'm reading three other, nonfiction Christian oriented books, plus my Bible reading and everything else. But C.S. Lewis talked about the benefits of imagination and fiction and things like that. And I feel like I have to have a little bit of that in my life as
mm,
far as reading or audiobooks. And so that's what I do is I is Harry Potter is kind of my outlet in that way. And so I'm all the way back through to Goblet of Fire because to be honest with the Harry Potter books, my two favorite books by far are Prisoner of Azkaban and then Goblet of Fire. Those are my two. Um,
mm.
Things before it, you're setting up the world, and that's nice. Things after that, um, especially the Order of the Phoenix, where you have Dolores Umbridge as the headmaster, and it was just it's just so excruciating because no matter how
Yeah,
bad she is in the movies, for those of you who've watched the movies, how bad she is as a character in the movies, she's so much worse in the books. And it's honestly like hard to read sometimes just how awful things are
yeah.
with her around. It's just rough.
And it doesn't
Um,
help that that's the longest book.
yeah, that's also true. That's also true. So that's a part of it as well. So yeah, this is the parts that I like. This is before everything starts to get real, before He Who
Yeah,
Shall Not Be Named really shows back up in full force. So it's still very whimsical at this point.
yeah. And there's a lot of fun around the games that take place in four.
Yes,
So
Quidditch.
there's a lot of it. Yeah, exactly. A lot of exciting things
Aren't
in
you
that.
Ravenclaw? Isn't that your house? I
Yeah,
think you took the
yeah,
test, so you're Ravenclaw.
yeah. I don't know what
I
to make
think
of that.
I think that fits. I think that tracks.
Maybe,
I think that tracks. So
maybe,
the more the intellectual,
maybe.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
I
I can
think
see
that
that.
tracks. I think
I can
that
see
tracks.
that.
Well, what do you? I mean, everybody likes to
Wants to be
think that
Gryffindor, yeah.
everybody wants to be
Um,
Gryffindor.
yeah, no, I
So
mean,
only
it's not
only
that
a
I
few of us
deny
are
it.
privileged to be Gryffindor, but
Yeah, exactly.
well, what is that? Is
Well,
that the house you really feel like you should represent yourself? It should be represented in?
well, part of it is just there's so little knowledge about the other houses.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know. I would just need to get a greater sense. I was taken aback by it, and I just haven't
I mean,
jumped into it enough.
better than Slytherin.
Yeah,
There's a lot known
yeah.
about Slytherin. You just don't want to know things.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. But I think it's
Okay.
funny though. This already illustrates the difference in Dakota and I. I am very much a one book at a time, max two,
Mm.
and he is, got half a dozen books and that he's reading, and this is different, And I found that there are different kind of readers out there. But I
It'd
will
probably be
say,
better for me. It'd be better for me to read one or two at a time. So I'd
you
actually
know,
get through
there's
them.
benefits. There's
Yeah.
benefits to each.
Yeah.
Um, but and there's kind of downsides too, because sometimes if I'm in a book that I'm not enjoying, I'm imprisoned, in that book until it's done. And I also have kind of the stubbornness to I can't stop a book. Like if I'm in it, I'm going to finish it.
Yeah.
But and that can be detrimental. But we certainly appreciate you guys joining us today. We've gone a little bit long today. We're not necessarily planning to go this long each time, but we really appreciate you joining us today on the M&M Discipleship Podcast. Until next time, let's look for God. And I hope that through our discussion, you'll be looking for God in your daily life, what He's doing. Let's learn from His Word like we have today, and let's strive to live out His teachings. We thank you for all your participation. We hope you have a great day.